and amazing co-host Ebony K. Williams to talk about the Kandi and Todd divorce proceedings. So on this one, what we're going to do is utilize Ebony's amazing intelligence when it comes to the law and being a celebrity and how those two things sort of intersect when it comes to what happens with a celebrity divorce, the money that's at stake, children being involved, minor children at that, in addition to recent...
This was never meant to be only a divorce story. What emerged behind sealed doors was not a peaceful split between two adults who just drifted apart. Based on what is now being examined, this became the gradual breakdown of a marriage burdened by control, tension, and unspoken anger. Carlos King did not present this as a simple ending. He presented it as a scenario stacked with complexity, finances, children, power, and accusations that refused to disappear. And when those layers were peeled away, the image turned far more disturbing than viewers anticipated. Because when relationships live under scrutiny, when family voices grow louder than partners, and when legal papers are signed under force, the harm does not appear overnight. It grows. What seemed solid on camera may never have been solid in reality. What seemed caring may have been calculated, and what appeared mutual may not have been fully defined at all. Now, with attorneys involved, stories forming, and public opinion tracking every move, one question lingers in the air. Was this marriage ever on level ground? Or was it falling apart long before anyone was prepared to acknowledge it? And once you notice what is being challenged now, it becomes obvious the story is far from finished.
Then a few days later after that, on December 2nd, I'm sorry, not December 2nd, what happened on December 1st, Todd Tucker's attorney, Randy Kessler, responded to Kandi's filing. And this is where things were said, Ebony, that rubbed the general public the wrong way. Not all, but some. But I wanted to get...
What the audience is witnessing now may resemble a celebrity divorce unfolding in real time. Court documents, carefully crafted statements, emotional social media posts meant to reveal everything while revealing nothing. But according to how Carlos King presents this situation, this was never simply about two individuals choosing to separate. This was a marriage that operated under strain from its earliest days. Beneath polished appearances and red carpet smiles existed a relationship molded by imbalance, financial, emotional, and psychological. And when those imbalances collide with family interference, power structures, and unresolved tension, endings are rarely peaceful. From the outside, Kandi Burruss and Todd Tucker appear strong, accomplished, united, a blended family defying the odds. But Carlos implies that what viewers witnessed on camera was incomplete, and that fractures existed long before any divorce filings appeared. Because when one partner enters marriage already established, already wealthy, already shielded, while the other enters under scrutiny, expectations are never balanced. And balance is where marriages either endure or quietly deteriorate. One of the most unsettling truths surrounding this marriage is the presence of a third voice, one that never truly left the relationship. Mama Joyce, Carlos does not accuse, he observes. And what he observes is a recurring dynamic where outside influence repeatedly complicated Todd's role inside his own marriage. Choices were questioned, motives were challenged, intentions were scrutinized. Whether deliberate or not, that pressure carries weight. When a partner feels constantly judged, not only by a spouse but by family, confidence erodes, authority weakens, and partnership slowly turns into performance. Carlos portrays Todd not as a villain, but as a man navigating a marriage where his footing was never fully secure. A situation where loyalty was demanded but trust was conditional, where commitment existed yet independence did not. And within that atmosphere, even love becomes fragile. Another layer Carlos highlights is emotional distance. Not the kind that appears suddenly, but the kind that grows quietly as life keeps accelerating. Career demands, business growth, touring, filming, brand expansion. According to the discussion, Kandi's world did not pause for marriage. And while ambition itself is not betrayal, imbalance can feel like abandonment when emotional needs remain unmet. Carlos introduces the idea, not as fact but as inquiry, that affection in this marriage may not have been evenly exchanged as it seemed. That public unity did not always mirror private emotional truth. And when emotional gaps form, people search for validation elsewhere, sometimes openly, sometimes within boundaries both partners claim to accept, and sometimes beyond them. Which leads the story into the first major legal turning point.
Everything you read, and I'm so glad you read it in its totality around Todd's request on the custody piece, the initial request, this is around a potential child support claim. Okay, so let's reverse engineer it. This is setting up a potential claim from Todd and his legal team to seek child support. I want everybody to immediately put spousal support on a separate shelf. A separate shelf. Spousal support and child support have absolutely nothing to do with each other. Okay, spousal support may or may not even be at play, depending on whether or not the judge decides to uphold the existing prenuptial agreement.
Stage in the unraveling, Carlos introduces legal insight to clarify something many viewers completely overlooked. When Todd answered the divorce petition, his request went beyond shared parenting time. He asked for primary physical custody and final decision-making control. And according to the legal breakdown provided, this move is not unusual, but it is intentional. The discussion explains that custody structures often shape financial assumptions. The parent granted primary physical custody usually becomes the receiver of child support, not both parties, meaning custody is not only about time, it is about leverage. This shifts the narrative. What some viewers labeled as a sudden power move may instead be a deliberate legal counter. A step meant to rebalance a situation that for years may have felt uneven. And suddenly Todd's public persona, the involved father, the everyday caregiver, the daddy daycare image, gains a new frame. Not performative, strategic, not evidence of innocence or wrongdoing, but evidence that this divorce is being contested on multiple fronts simultaneously. If custody revealed strategy, the prenup revealed pressure. Carlos returns to footage many viewers recall, but never fully examined. The hours leading up to the wedding, the unfinished negotiations, the visible strain, and this is where the second interview lands.
The time frame. The fact that these two were 24 hours before their wedding, still going back and forth around the document itself, clauses, what this means, interpretation. Already that's a flag to any judge, Carlos. Because ideally, for a prenup to be deemed kind of best practices, this should have been done months ago. Months ago, this should have been in the can. This is what this really is supposed to look like in best practices is we set a wedding date, and we each give our lawyers the document. Your lawyer drafts it. They send it to my lawyer. We spend at least, on average, with this kind of money involved, a month to 3 months negotiating back and forth. What's fair, what I like, what you like, cut this out, retract this, da, 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 da. Then we agree on the document. I sign, you sign, it's notarized, it's in the can. At least a month, if not 3 or 4 months ahead of the wedding date. When you are just the nature of the pressure cooker of vows start in 24 hours.
Finalizing a prenuptial agreement 24 to 48 hours before a wedding raise is concerned. Not automatically invalid, but concerning especially if one party lacks independent legal counsel according to the explanation standard practice is months ahead, allowing time for review, negotiation, understanding without pressure. What's being highlighted here is not blame, it's exposure. If Todd signed under emotional stress, under wedding day urgency, without his own attorney present, the document may not reflect informed consent, it may reflect necessity, and that possibility alone forces the marriage to be re-examined retroactively, because a union built on protection for one party and sacrifice from the other is never truly equal. Another factor complicating this divorce is the question of relationship boundaries. Kandi and Todd have openly acknowledged a non-traditional arrangement, threesomes, openness, flexibility. But Carlos raises the point most people avoid. Openness requires structure, and structure requires clarity. If actions were permitted only with shared consent, then anything beyond that understanding could still constitute betrayal. And in court, definitions outweigh intentions. This becomes even more serious if the prenup contained an infidelity clause, a condition that could drastically impact settlement outcomes if limits were crossed. Rare? Yes. Impossible? No. And in this situation, the absence of public clarity leaves every angle open to interpretation. This divorce is not unfolding only in courtrooms. It is playing out in public perception. Every post, every interview, every pause is examined, not just for feeling, but for motive. Carlos does not instruct the audience what to believe. He directs them on what to observe. And what begins to surface is a marriage that may never have rested on equal footing. A partnership influenced by power, access, protection, and pressure long before attorneys became involved. And if this is only what has emerged so far, then what follows may be far more revealing. By the time this divorce reached public awareness, the legal filings were no longer the most volatile element of the story. What made the situation explosive was something far harder to define: boundaries. Because when a marriage exists outside traditional norms, clarity becomes critical. And according to the way Carlos King frames this collapse, clarity may have been the one thing this relationship never consistently possessed. Publicly, Kandi Burruss and Todd Tucker portrayed themselves as open, honest, willing to confront uncomfortable realities. They acknowledged a non-traditional structure. They admitted to experimentation, to openness. But Carlos presents a crucial point that many viewers completely missed. Admitting openness does not erase betrayal. In many cases, it complicates it further. Carlos does not accuse either party of misconduct. Instead, he underscores a tension now sitting at the core of this divorce. What was explicitly allowed versus what was assumed. Because openness demands rules, and rules demand agreement, and agreement demands clarity. If intimacy outside the marriage was acceptable only under specific terms, mutual presence, full awareness, explicit consent, then anything outside those limits becomes a breach, not of values, but of contract. And contracts matter in court. This is where the narrative shifts from emotional theory to legal consequence. Because once a relationship enters gray space, interpretation becomes leverage. The pressure intensified when People magazine entered the narrative. According to Carlos, the outlet reported that Todd was allegedly communicating with other women. The wording matters here, allegedly, but Carlos also emphasizes something important. People magazine does not publish claims without verification, multiple confirmations, sources, accountability. That distinction matters because once an allegation appears in a mainstream outlet, it stops being rumor and becomes part of the record, at least in public perception. And public perception in cases like this is never neutral. As reports circulated, both sides responded cautiously. Kandi posted about emotional strain, about presenting strength while privately struggling. Todd answered with his own message, addressing his difficulties, his identity as a father, his internal tension. Carlos frames this not as coincidence, but as calculation. Because modern divorces unfold in two arenas, the courtroom and the timeline. Every post is weighed, every phrase intentional, every silence deliberate. And in high-profile separations, perception does not just shape fan opinion, it shapes leverage. As this story expanded, one uncomfortable question refused to fade. If a marriage was open, what exactly qualifies as cheating? That question is not philosophical. It is legal. And this is where Carlos introduces the most consequential conversation of the entire breakdown.
Go ahead.
Two more questions. With that being said, Kandi and Todd have been very public and open about inviting women in their bedroom. It's been something that they've been very open about. This is not a secret. They have threesomes. They've been very open about it. They had that understanding. If there is a bad boy clause or bad woman clause in the prenuptial agreement,
Carlos addresses the question head-on, but with precision. If Todd interacted with other women outside of Kandi's presence, outside the boundaries they agreed on, would that legally count as infidelity? The response, based on the legal breakdown presented, is unsettling because it offers no certainty. There is no single rule. One judge might see openness as full consent. Another might see it as permission with limits. And once those limits are crossed, it becomes cheating, regardless of how the marriage appeared publicly. The interview stresses a critical truth. This ultimately falls to judicial discretion, not public declarations, not social media framing, but an interpretation of intent, agreement, and behavior, meaning the exact same actions could be excused in one courtroom and penalized in another. And if an infidelity clause exists in the prenup, uncommon but possible, the financial and legal impact could be severe. This is not about gossip. It is about definition. Carlos suggests that what once looked modern may now be risky because openness, without written clarity, creates exposure. Without defined terms, one partner's understanding becomes the other partner's argument, and ambiguity benefits only the side best prepared to litigate it. In this light, Todd's legal stance appears less impulsive and more protective. Not a man seeking dominance, but a man shielding himself from interpretation. As the legal layers thicken, the emotional toll becomes undeniable. Children are watching. Families are aligning. Stories are forming faster than verified facts. Carlos notes this is the moment when divorces often turn aggressive, not driven by anger, but by fear. Fear of losing access, fear of losing influence, fear of losing self. And once fear enters, collaboration exits. Not only how it ended, but how it operated. Were both partners living by the same rules? Were boundaries ever clearly defined? And if they were they honored? Carlos doesn't resolve these questions. He lets them linger. because unanswered questions hold more weight than accusations. Despite constant coverage, Carlos makes it clear the public is still seeing fragments, filings without context, posts without meaning, statements without consequence. While fans debate loyalty and fault, the real decisions are unfolding quietly in boardrooms, briefs, and strategy meetings. Out of sight, this divorce is no longer about lost love. It is about definitions of consent, fidelity, equity, power. And once definitions enter court, emotion becomes irrelevant. Only interpretation remains. And interpretation is unpredictable, which means whatever the public believes today may not survive what comes next. By this stage, one reality becomes unavoidable. This was never just about love ending. It was about power moving. When marriages exist where fame, money, and perception collide, divorce stops being private the moment paperwork appears. What follows is never clean. It becomes tactical, deliberate, emotional, yet procedural. Carlos King didn't describe disorder for drama. He described a mechanism activating, because once attorneys step in, every past choice becomes evidence. Every silence looks suspicious. Every public action becomes calculated. Nothing exists alone. The prenup isn't just paperwork. It's leverage. Custody isn't only parenting. It's positioning. Public messages aren't emotional releases. They are narrative armor. And when all of this converges, the marriage stops being a relationship and becomes a battlefield. What makes this case especially volatile is not what has been proven, but what can be argued. Todd's challenge to the prenup doesn't mean it fails, but it forces examination. Timing, counsel, pressure, circumstance. Judges don't just read signatures, they examine conditions. And once scrutiny starts, it spreads. If one provision is questioned, everything connected to it becomes open: behavior, consent, boundaries that were assumed instead of written. This is where perception turns dangerous. An open marriage, once discussed publicly, often gets simplified into permission. But legally, permission is never absolute. It is conditional, contextual, specific, and vague conditions are the easiest to dispute. That's why the story doesn't rest on what happened, but on how it's framed. And framing is power, especially with children involved. Because once custody enters, the tone shifts. Travel becomes absence. Flexibility becomes instability. Support becomes substitution. This isn't about parenting skill. It's about narrative responsibility. And narrative determines outcomes. Carlos King makes one thing clear, without stating it outright. Both sides are preparing for multiple endings. Not because they expect disaster, but because they can't afford surprise. That explains the restraint, the timing, the wording, the silence. Escalation doesn't begin loudly. It begins with positioning. And the most dangerous phase of a high-profile divorce is when everyone is still acting calm. This is where narratives solidify. Fans take sides. Assumptions replace evidence. Speculation fills silence. And silence here is never empty. It's intentional. What Carlos subtly highlights is that public sympathy is already being negotiated. Not requested, not demanded, managed. Because sympathy creates pressure. Pressure shapes settlements. Settlements define legacy. And legacy outlives momentary reputation. Especially when children will grow up online, where nothing disappears. That's why nothing feels accidental. Not timing, not language, not distance, not restraint. Because restraint signals preparation, which leads to the most uncomfortable truth. There doesn't need to be a villain for harm to exist. There doesn't need to be cheating for trust to erode. There doesn't need to be cruelty for damage to occur. Sometimes collapse happens because two people built something under conditions that were never stable. External pressure, family expectations, public exposure, uneven power. None destroy a marriage alone. Together, they wear it down quietly until nothing remains. Carlos doesn't accuse. He contextualizes. And context often reveals more than blame. When you zoom out, the question stops being who did what and becomes how did this last at all? That's the deeper story here. Not infidelity, not contracts, not headlines, but imbalance. An imbalance accepted, normalized, and eventually weaponized. What comes next won't depend on truth alone. It will depend on interpretation, discretion, which argument sounds more reasonable in court than online. That's what makes this case unpredictable. The same facts can lead to opposite outcomes. One ruling could uphold everything. Another could reopen it all. One judge might see openness as consent, another as confusion. And inside that uncertainty lies the real tension. This isn't a story racing to resolution. It's one moving toward confrontation slowly, carefully, with consequences that won't surface until decisions are final and narratives can no longer be managed. Until then, everything stays alleged. Everything stays strategic. Every move matters. Because in divorces like this, the end doesn't come when papers are signed. It comes when the story stops changing, and that hasn't happened yet. This story won't end with a ruling. It ends with something more permanent, public memory. Long after files are sealed and headlines fade, what remains is the version people choose to believe. What Carlos King has presented isn't an answer. It's a framework. A reminder that in high-profile divorces, truth isn't loud. It's layered. It hides in timelines, legal phrasing, what's said carefully, and what's never said at all. Questions remain about consent, power, agreements assumed instead of defined, lines blurred long before anyone noticed. While fans rush to choose sides, the reality is more complex than loyalty or blame. When money, family, reputation, and children intersect, there are no clean victories, only negotiated outcomes. What happens next won't be decided by emotion or public opinion. It will be decided by interpretation, discretion, and how the past is framed in the present. That's why this case matters beyond celebrity. It exposes how fragile boundaries are when love, ambition, and control coexist. How quickly private choices become public leverage. How easily perception turns into currency. Before the final chapter is written, before judgments are rendered legally or socially, ask what parts feel familiar. What assumptions are being made. How often visibility is mistaken for truth. Stay alert. Stay critical. Don't confuse silence with innocence or noise with facts. Because in stories like this, truth doesn't explode. It surfaces slowly, long after everyone assumes it already has.